Cat leads firefighters to a locked room. What they found inside shocked everyone. The sirens wailed through the quiet streets of Brookdale, their piercing sound breaking the stillness of the night. Flames illuminated the sky above a modest two-story house on Oak Lane, sending thick plumes of smoke curling into the air. Neighbors gathered on the sidewalk, their faces lit by the orange glow of the blaze, their whispers full of worry for the family inside. Firefighter Jack Bennett and his team arrived quickly, leaping into action as they assessed the situation. The house was engulfed on one side, the fire spreading rapidly toward the upper floors. "Everyone's out except the cat," a distraught woman cried, clutching her two small children. "Please, he's still in there." "We'll do our best," Jack assured her, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "Do you know where he might be?" The woman shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "He could be anywhere. His name is Milo, he's orange and white. Please, don't let him." Her voice broke, but Jack nodded firmly. "We'll find him." As the firefighters made their way into the house, the air grew thick with smoke, the heat pressing against their suits. Jack led the way, his flashlight cutting through the haze. "Milo," he called, his voice muffled by his mask. "Here, kitty." For a few agonizing moments, there was no response, just the crackling of flames and the distant creak of collapsing wood. Then, from somewhere above, a faint meow pierced the noise. "He's upstairs," Jack shouted to his team. They moved quickly, navigating the crumbling staircase and dodging falling debris. At the top, Jack swept his flashlight across the hallway, searching for the source of the sound. "Milo, where are you?" Another meow echoed, louder this time. Jack turned toward a door at the end of the hall, its edges glowing faintly with heat. "Over here," he called. The team worked together to force the door open, revealing a bedroom filled with smoke. In the corner, perched on a low dresser, was an orange and white cat with wide, terrified eyes. "Got him," Jack said, stepping forward carefully. But as he reached for the cat, Milo leapt down and darted toward another door, a small, locked one at the far side of the room. "Milo, no!" Jack shouted, his heart sinking as the cat pawed frantically at the door. It was an odd place for the cat to flee, but there was no time to question it. Jack motioned to one of his teammates. "Get the cat while I check the door." The firefighter scooped Milo up, but the cat squirmed and yowled, desperate to stay near the locked room. Jack frowned, his instincts telling him something wasn't right. "There's something in there," he said, trying the handle. It didn't budge. "Give me the Halligan tool," Jack called, and within seconds, one of his teammates handed him the heavy, crowbar-like device. With practiced force, Jack pried the door open, the lock giving way with a loud crack. As the door swung open, a rush of hot air hit him, but what lay beyond stopped him cold. Inside the small room was a crib, and in it, a baby barely more than a few months old, crying weakly. The air in the room was stifling, and Jack didn't waste a second. "There's a baby," he yelled, his voice urgent. The team sprang into action, clearing a path as Jack carefully lifted the infant into his arms. The baby's cries grew louder, a reassuring sign amidst the chaos. Jack turned to the firefighter holding Milo, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. "The cat led us to this room," he said. "He saved her." Outside, the mother's sobs of relief turned to cries of joy as Jack emerged from the house, the baby cradled safely in his arms and Milo following close behind. The neighbors erupted into applause, their faces reflecting the emotional weight of the moment. "She was in the locked room," Jack explained to the mother, handing her the baby. "Milo led us straight to her. He's the reason she's alive." The woman clutched her children tightly, tears streaming down her face as she kissed Milo's head. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Thank you for saving her." As the flames were extinguished and the crowd began to disperse, Milo sat calmly at the mother's feet, his orange and white fur singed at the edges but his demeanor serene. Jack watched the scene from a distance, his mind replaying the moment the cat had led him to the locked room. It wasn't just instinct. It was as if Milo had known exactly where the baby was. You don't see that every day, one of Jack's teammates said, clapping him on the shoulder. A cat leading us to a baby? That's something you tell your grandkids about. Jack nodded, but his thoughts lingered. The locked door, the baby left alone in the room. Something didn't add up. I think there's more to this, he said, his voice low. That cat wasn't just trying to save himself. He knew. Later that evening, after ensuring the fire was fully out, Jack approached the family. The mother, a young woman named Laura, held her baby tightly while her two older children clung to her sides. Milo sat in her lap, purring softly as she stroked his fur. How's everyone holding up? Jack asked, crouching beside her. Laura managed a weak smile. We're okay thanks to you. And thanks to Milo. Jack glanced at the cat, his curiosity growing. Can I ask you something? He said. Why was the baby in that room? And why was it locked? Laura's smile faltered, and she hesitated before answering. That room was supposed to be storage, she said. We don't use it. I didn't even realize the baby was in there. Jack's brow furrowed. You didn't put her there? No, Laura said, her voice trembling. I don't know how she ended up there. The unease in Jack's chest deepened. If Laura hadn't put the baby in the room, how had she gotten there? And why was the door locked? He decided not to press her further, sensing that she was already overwhelmed. But the questions gnawed at him as he returned to the fire truck. Back at the station, Jack shared his concerns with his captain, a no-nonsense veteran named Maria. You think there's more to this? Maria asked, raising an eyebrow. I do, Jack said. It doesn't make sense. The mother didn't know the baby was in the room, and the door was locked from the outside. Someone had to put her there. Maria frowned, considering his words. We'll report it to the authorities, she said. But you know how these things go. Unless there's clear evidence of foul play, it might not go anywhere. Unable to shake his suspicion, Jack decided to dig deeper on his own. Over the next few days, he visited the family at the temporary shelter where they were staying. Laura seemed hesitant at first but gradually opened up about her life. She was a single mother, struggling to make ends meet after her husband had walked out a year earlier. The house had been a rental, and the fire had left them with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Milo's been with us since before the baby was born, Laura said, her voice soft as she stroked the cat. He's always been protective of the kids, but this, I don't know how to explain it. Jack studied Milo, who sat perched on the edge of the couch, his sharp eyes fixed on the baby. Has anything strange happened recently? Jack asked. Anything that seemed out of place? Laura hesitated, her gaze dropping to the floor. There was one thing, she admitted. A few nights before the fire, I heard noises coming from that room, scratching like something trying to get in. I thought it was just Milo chasing a mouse. But now, I'm not so sure. Jack's unease deepened. He decided to visit the charred remains of the house, hoping to find some clue that might explain the mystery. As he sifted through the debris, Milo appeared at his side, seemingly out of nowhere. The cat meowed softly, his tail flicking as he padded toward the blackened remains of the locked room. What is it, Milo? Jack murmured, following him. Milo stopped in front of a scorched cabinet and pawed at it insistently. Jack crouched down, pulling the door open to reveal a small, hidden compartment. Inside was a pile of old photographs, their edges singed but the images still visible. Jack's breath caught as he flipped through them. Each photo showed a woman who looked eerily similar to Laura, holding a baby in her arms. The back of one photo had a handwritten note, "Protect her at all costs." Jack stared at the photographs, his pulse quickening. The woman in the images could have been Laura's twin. Same soft features, same warm smile. But there was something older about her, something timeless in the sepia tones of the pictures that hinted they were from a much earlier era. And the baby in her arms, though faintly visible, bore a striking resemblance to Laura's youngest child. Milo meowed softly, his amber eyes fixed on Jack as if urging him to continue. Jack carefully set the photos aside and reached deeper into the hidden compartment. His fingers brushed against something cold and metallic, a locket. He pulled it out and opened it, revealing two tiny portraits inside. one of the same woman from the photographs, and the other of an infant. "What is this, Milo?" Jack muttered under his breath. Why was this hidden here? As he returned to the shelter to speak with Laura, Jack's thoughts swirled with questions. The photographs hinted at a connection deeper than coincidence. But what could it be? Milo's actions seemed almost deliberate, as if the cat had been guarding this secret all along. At the shelter, Laura greeted him with a tired but grateful smile. "You're back," she said. "Did you find something?" Jack hesitated, holding out the locket and photos. "I found these in the remains of the room where we found your baby. Do you recognize the woman in them?" Laura's eyes widened as she took the items from his hands. She studied the photographs, her expression shifting from confusion to shock. This is my grandmother," she said, her voice trembling. "But I've never seen these pictures before. And the baby? It looks like my daughter." "Your grandmother?" Jack repeated, leaning forward. "Do you know much about her?" Laura shook her head, still staring at the photos. "Not much. She passed away before I was born, and my parents never talked about her. But I don't understand. Why were these hidden in the house?" Jack frowned, his mind racing. "There's something else," he said. "The note on the back of one of the photos. It says, 'Protect her at all costs.' Do you think your grandmother might have been trying to send a message?" Laura's hands trembled as she turned the photo over, reading the words for herself. "I don't know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it feels like this is about my family. About my daughter." Milo jumped onto Laura's lap, curling up as if to comfort her. Jack watched the cat, his curiosity growing. "Milo knew exactly where to lead us," he said. "It's like he's been guarding these secrets." Laura nodded slowly, her hand resting on Milo's back. "He's always been more than just a pet," she said. "Sometimes it feels like he understands things we don't." Jack decided to dig deeper into the history of the house and Laura's family. Over the next few days, he uncovered records that painted a clearer picture. The house had been owned by Laura's grandmother, a woman named Margaret, who had mysteriously disappeared in the 1950s. Neighbors at the time claimed Margaret had been a recluse, often seen speaking to her cat as if it were a confidant. But the most shocking discovery came from an old newspaper article. It reported that Margaret had been embroiled in a bitter legal battle to keep custody of her child after claiming that a powerful local family was trying to take the baby from her. The case was dropped when Margaret vanished, leaving the child to be raised by distant relatives. She was protecting her baby, Jack told Laura as he shared the information. Just like the note said, Laura's face paled as she listened. "And now I'm living in the same house she did," she said. "Raising my own daughter." Jack nodded. "It's almost like history is repeating itself. And Milo, he's connected to all of this somehow." Laura's eyes widened. "Do you think, could Milo be tied to my grandmother's cat?" The idea seemed impossible, but Jack couldn't deny the uncanny connection. "It's hard to say," he admitted, "but Milo's actions, leading us to the baby, revealing these secrets, it's like he's fulfilling a promise." As they pieced together the mystery, new questions emerged. Who had locked the door to the baby's room, and why? And what danger, if any, still lingered from Margaret's past? That night, as Laura put her children to bed, Milo sat by the baby's crib, his gaze steady and protective. Jack stayed nearby, determined not to leave until they had answers. The air in the house felt heavy, as if the secrets of the past were pressing down, waiting to be uncovered. "Milo saved your daughter," Jack said quietly to Laura. "And I think he's trying to save your family, too." The house was quiet that evening, but the air was thick with tension. Milo sat vigil by the baby's crib, his ears flicking at every creak of the old floorboards. Jack and Laura sat in the living room, the photos and lockets spread across the coffee table as they pored over them once more. "What could have made Margaret disappear so suddenly?" Laura asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "If she was fighting for her child, why would she leave?" Jack shook his head. "That's what doesn't make sense. From everything I've read, she seemed determined to protect her baby. It's possible she was forced to leave, or worse, silenced. The weight of his words settled over them like a storm cloud. The idea that Margaret had been silenced for trying to protect her child sent a chill down Laura's spine. And now, decades later, it feels like whatever she was fighting against is still here, Laura said, glancing at Milo. He knew where to take us. It's like he's been waiting for this moment. Jack nodded, his mind racing. We need to find out more about Margaret's legal battle, he said. There might be records that explain who she was fighting against. The next morning, Jack and Laura visited the local courthouse, hoping to dig deeper into Margaret's case. The clerk, a woman in her 60s with a sharp memory, seemed intrigued by their inquiry. Margaret Carter, she murmured, flipping through the dusty files. That name rings a bell. After several minutes of searching, the clerk produced a folder, its edges frayed with age. Here it is, she said, sliding it across the counter. Jack opened the folder, his heart pounding. Inside were court documents detailing Margaret's custody battle. The opposing party was listed as the Whitmore family, a name that still carried weight in the town. The Whitmores had been a powerful and wealthy family, known for their influence over local politics and businesses. They claimed Margaret was unfit to raise her child, Jack read aloud. But she accused them of fabricating evidence to take the baby away. Laura leaned over his shoulder, her eyes scanning the papers. Why would they want her child? She asked, her voice trembling. What did they stand to gain? The more they read, the clearer it became that Margaret's fight had been far from fair. The Whitmores had used their wealth and connections to paint Margaret as unstable, despite testimony from neighbors who described her as a loving mother. One document revealed a particularly chilling detail. Margaret had claimed that the Whitmores wanted her child for reasons beyond their obsession with control, but the specifics were redacted. They were hiding something, Jack said, his jaw tightening. Something they didn't want anyone to know. Laura's hands shook as she clutched one of the papers. Do you think they're still involved in what's happening now? She asked. Could they be the reason my daughter was locked in that room? Jack hesitated. It's possible, he said. The Whitmore name still carries weight in this town. If they're connected, it means whatever Margaret was fighting against didn't stop with her. Back at the house, the tension only grew. Milo seemed more on edge than usual, pacing between the baby's crib and the charred remains of the locked room. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching them. That night, as Laura put her children to bed, she found herself staring at the locket Jack had found. She opened it again, studying the faces of her grandmother and the infant. She never stopped fighting for you, Laura whispered, her voice breaking. And I won't stop fighting for my daughter. As the house fell silent, Jack and Milo kept watch in the living room. The faint sound of footsteps outside caught Jack's attention, and he motioned for Milo to stay quiet. Peering through the window, he spotted a figure lurking near the edge of the property. Jack's heart raced. They're here, he whispered to himself. Grabbing a flashlight, Jack slipped outside, Milo trailing silently behind him. The figure moved quickly, disappearing into the shadows of the trees. Jack followed, his adrenaline surging as he navigated the dark forest. Who's there? He called out, his voice firm. There was no answer, only the sound of rustling leaves and snapping branches. Milo growled softly, his body tense as he sniffed the air. Jack's flashlight caught a glint of something, a piece of cloth snagged on a branch. He picked it up, his stomach twisting as he recognized the symbol embroidered on it, the Whitmore family crest. Back at the house, Jack showed the cloth to Laura, who paled at the sight. It's them, she said, her voice shaking. They're still watching us. Jack nodded, his jaw set. They haven't stopped, he said. But neither have we. We need to find out what they're hiding before it's too late. The discovery of the Whitmore family crest sent a ripple of fear through Laura, but it also ignited a spark of determination. They've been watching us, she said, her voice steadier now. But why? If they already tried to destroy my grandmother's life, why come after me now? Jack sat across from her, the piece of cloth resting on the table between them. Because they didn't finish what they started, he said. Margaret fought them, and even though she disappeared, they never stopped trying to protect whatever secrets she uncovered. Laura frowned, her gaze flickering to Milo, who lay curled protectively beside the baby's crib. But that was decades ago. Why would they care about me or my daughter now? Jack leaned forward, his tone resolute. Because you're part of her legacy. Whatever Margaret was protecting, it didn't end with her. It's tied to your family, and they see you as a threat. The next morning, Jack and Laura decided to confront the mystery head-on. They drove to the outskirts of town, where the Whitmore estate loomed behind wrought iron gates. It was an imposing structure, its grandeur tarnished by an air of secrecy and menace. "Are you sure about this?" Laura asked as they approached the gate. Jack nodded. "We need answers, and this is the only way to get them." They were met at the gate by a stern-faced security guard who demanded to know their business. "We're here about Margaret Carter," Jack said firmly. "We know the Whitmores were involved in her disappearance, and we're not leaving until we get answers." The guard's expression darkened, but before he could respond, a voice called out from the intercom. "Let them in." The gates creaked open, and the guard motioned them through. Laura's heart pounded as they drove up the winding driveway, the estate's towering facade growing larger with each passing second. Inside, they were escorted to a grand study, where an older man sat behind a massive desk. His sharp features and piercing gaze immediately identified him as a Whitmore. He introduced himself as Charles, the current patriarch of the family. "What brings you here?" Charles asked, his tone cordial but cold. Jack didn't hesitate. "We've uncovered evidence that ties your family to Margaret Carter's disappearance," he said. "And now it seems you're targeting her granddaughter. We want to know why." Charles raised an eyebrow, his demeanor unshaken. "Margaret Carter was a tragic case," he said. "But that was long before my time. Whatever you think you've uncovered is nothing more than old rumors." "That's a lie," Laura interjected, her voice trembling with anger. "You tried to take her child, and when she fought back, she disappeared. And now you're watching me and my daughter. Why?" Charles's expression tightened, and for the first time, his calm facade cracked. "You're mistaken," he said. "My family had no interest in Margaret's child." Jack leaned forward, placing the photographs and the locket on the desk. "Then explain this," he said. "Explain why these were hidden in a compartment in her house. Explain why someone from your family was on my property last night." Charles's eyes flickered to the locket, and his jaw clenched. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," he said. "Margaret wasn't just fighting us. She was fighting herself. She was unstable, paranoid. She saw enemies where there were none." "That's not true," Laura snapped. "She was trying to protect her child from you." Charles sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Margaret was a threat to her own child," he said. "She believed the child had abilities, that she was special. It was nonsense, of course, but Margaret became obsessed with the idea. She claimed the child was destined for something greater, that she needed to keep her hidden from the world." Laura froze, her breath catching. "Abilities?" she repeated. "What are you talking about?" Charles hesitated, his gaze shifting to Milo, who had followed them into the study. The cat sat perched on a chair, his eyes fixed on Charles with unsettling intensity. "Margaret believed the child had some connection to the cat," Charles said, his voice lowering. "She said the cat wasn't ordinary, that it was a protector, a guide. It sounds ridiculous, but Margaret believed it with all her heart. When she disappeared, so did the child. And now you're here with the same cat." Laura's blood ran cold. "You're saying Milo was my grandmother's cat? That he's been alive all this time?" Charles shrugged. "It's impossible." But Margaret thought the cat was more than just an animal. She claimed it was part of something bigger. The tension in the room was suffocating. Jack stood, his hands clenched into fists. "You're leaving out the most important part," he said. "Why did Margaret disappear? And why are you still involved after all these years?" Charles's face darkened. "Because Margaret wasn't just protecting her child from us," he said. "She was protecting her from something far more dangerous. And if you keep digging, you'll find yourself in the same danger." Laura's chest tightened as Charles's words hung in the air. "What do you mean, far more dangerous?" she demanded. "What could be worse than what your family did to Margaret?" Charles hesitated, his gaze flickering to Milo, who remained unervingly still. Margaret wasn't entirely wrong about the cat, he admitted. Our family dismissed her claims as the ramblings of a desperate woman, but there were incidents, things that couldn't be explained. Jack leaned forward, his voice sharp. What kind of incidents? Charles sighed, the weight of decades pressing on his features. Margaret believed the cat was connected to her bloodline, that it had been with her family for generations, appearing whenever danger was near. She claimed it had an almost supernatural awareness, guiding and protecting her lineage. At first, we thought she was imagining things, but then we started seeing it too. The cat was always there, always watching. Laura's hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the desk. And you saw this as a threat? Charles's expression hardened. We saw it as something we couldn't control. Margaret was willing to defy us, to expose our family's dealings, all because she believed the cat was guiding her. She became obsessed with the idea that her child would inherit this connection. We couldn't risk her spreading these ideas. So you destroyed her, Jack said, his voice cold. You forced her into hiding and took away everything she cared about. Charles shook his head. Margaret disappeared of her own accord. We wanted her silenced, yes, but not like that. She vanished before we could act. We assumed she'd taken the child and gone far away. But clearly we were wrong. Laura stood, her voice trembling with rage. You destroyed her life because of your greed and fear. And now you're trying to do the same to me. Charles raised a hand, his expression unreadable. We're not the only ones interested in your family, he said. Margaret believed the cat was protecting her from something far older than us. Something that wanted her child's abilities. Jack frowned. What abilities? What are you talking about? Charles hesitated, as if weighing whether to reveal the truth. Margaret believed her child had a unique connection to the cat, that it gave her a kind of intuition, a heightened awareness of danger. Whether it's true or not, I can't say. But if it is, there are people out there who would do anything to exploit it. The room fell into a tense silence as Charles's words sank in. Laura glanced at Milo, who had remained eerily calm throughout the exchange. If what you're saying is true, she said softly, then Milo isn't just protecting my family. He's protecting something far bigger. Jack stood, his voice steady but resolute. If this is about control, then the people Margaret was hiding from aren't going to stop. They've already tried to hurt Laura and her child. They'll come back. Charles's jaw tightened. You're right. And if you value your lives, you'll leave this town and never come back. Laura's eyes blazed with determination. No, she said firmly. Margaret didn't run, and neither will I. This ends now. As they left the Whitmore estate, Jack turned to Laura, his face grim. This is bigger than we thought, he said. If what Charles said is true, you and your daughter are in real danger. Laura nodded, her resolve unwavering. Margaret fought to protect her child, and now it's my turn. We need to find out who else is involved in this, and why they want my family. They returned home to find Milo waiting by the door, his sharp eyes scanning the yard as if sensing the tension in the air. Laura crouched beside him, her voice trembling. You've been protecting us all along, haven't you? She whispered. What are you trying to show us? That night, Laura dreamed of Margaret. In her dream, her grandmother stood in a field, holding the locket and gesturing toward a distant forest. The air was thick with urgency, Margaret's voice echoing in her mind. Find the truth. It's the only way to save her. Laura woke with a start, her heart pounding. She turned to Jack, who was sitting by the window, keeping watch. I think Margaret's trying to tell us something, she said. We need to go back to the house. There's something there we haven't found yet. Jack hesitated but nodded. If Margaret left something behind, it might be the key to ending this. As dawn broke, they returned to the burned remains of Margaret's house. Milo led the way, his movements purposeful and precise. He stopped near the charred remains of the locked room, pawing at the floorboards. Jack grabbed a crowbar and pried the boards loose, revealing a hidden compartment beneath. Inside was a small box, untouched by the fire. Laura opened it with trembling hands, revealing a collection of documents, a hand-drawn map, and a journal. The journal was Margaret's. Flipping through its pages, Laura found entries that chronicled her fight against the Whitmores, her fears for her child, and cryptic warnings about a shadowy group that sought to exploit her family's connection to Milo. "This is it," Laura whispered. "This is what they didn't want us to find." As Laura turned the pages of Margaret's journal, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Margaret's writing was frantic at times, detailing her growing fear as the Whitmores closed in on her. But it wasn't just the Whitmores she was afraid of, it was a group she referred to as the Circle. "The Whitmores are dangerous, but the Circle is something else entirely," one entry read. "They're ancient, powerful, and relentless. They want my child because they believe she's the key to controlling Milo. They think he's more than just a protector, that he's a gateway to something bigger." Laura's hands trembled as she read. "The Circle," she whispered. "What is that?" Jack leaned over her shoulder, his expression grim. "It sounds like a cult," he said. "One obsessed with your family and whatever connection you have to Milo." Laura flipped to another page, her pulse quickening as she read Margaret's warnings about her baby. "If they take her, they'll use her to harness Milo's power. He's more than just a cat. He's a sentinel, a link to forces we can't begin to understand. I have to keep her hidden. If they find her, it's over." The journal also included the hand-drawn map they had found in the box. It marked a location deep in the forest behind the house, labeled only as the Guardian's Rest. Margaret's notes indicated that this was a place of safety, a hidden sanctuary connected to Milo's mysterious origins. "We need to go there," Laura said, holding up the map. "If Margaret left this, it means she believed it could protect us." Jack hesitated, glancing at the burned remains of the house around them. "If this Circle is still out there, they might already know about it," he said. "We'll need to be careful." Milo meowed softly, his amber eyes locking onto Laura's. It was as if he understood what they were planning and was urging them forward. As the sun began to set, they set out for the forest, following the map's winding paths. The air grew cooler and denser as they ventured deeper into the woods, the towering trees casting long shadows over their path. Milo led the way, his movements deliberate and purposeful. "Do you think this place is real?" Laura asked, clutching the journal tightly. "If Margaret believed in it, there's a chance," Jack said. "But if the Circle has been watching your family, they might already be here." Their fears were confirmed when they reached a clearing marked on the map. At its center stood a weathered stone structure, partially hidden by vines and moss. It resembled an ancient altar, its surface etched with symbols that glowed faintly in the fading light. But they weren't alone. Figures emerged from the shadows, their faces obscured by dark hoods. The air grew thick with tension as the group encircled Laura, Jack, and Milo. One of the figures stepped forward, their voice low and measured. "You shouldn't have come here," they said. "The cat is ours. He always has been." Laura stepped forward, her fear replaced by anger. "Milo isn't yours," she said. "He's been protecting my family for generations, and I'm not letting you take him." The figure chuckled, the sound cold and unnerving. "You don't understand," they said. "Milo isn't just a protector. He's a guardian of something far greater, a force that can shape the future. And your family is the key to unlocking it." Before Laura could respond, Milo hissed, his fur bristling as he leapt onto the altar. The symbols beneath his paws flared brightly, casting an otherworldly glow over the clearing. The figures recoiled, their voices rising in alarm. "What's happening?" Laura whispered, shielding her eyes from the light. Jack grabbed her arm, pulling her back as the light intensified. "I think Milo's doing what Margaret said he would," he said. "Protecting you." The ground beneath the altar began to tremble, and a deep, resonant hum filled the air. The figures shouted in panic, retreating into the shadows as the light consumed the clearing. Milo stood at the center, his gaze fixed on Laura as if to reassure her. When the light faded, the clearing was empty, the figures gone. Milo leapt down from the altar, his demeanor calm as he returned to Laura's side. She knelt beside him, her voice shaking. "You saved us," she said. "Just like Margaret said you would." Jack exhaled, the tension in his body easing. Whatever that was, he said, it scared them off. But this isn't over. We need to figure out what the circle was trying to do, and how to stop them for good. As the clearing settled into an eerie calm, Laura remained crouched beside Milo, her hands trembling as she stroked his fur. The faint glow of the symbols on the altar lingered, pulsing softly like a heartbeat. "What was that, Milo?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "What did you just do?" Jack knelt beside her, his eyes scanning the altar. "Whatever it wasn't ordinary," he said. "This place, it's not just a sanctuary. It's something more." Laura opened Margaret's journal again, flipping to a section where her grandmother had described the altar in cryptic terms. "The Guardian's Rest is a place of power, but it is also a test. Those who seek control will find destruction. Only those who protect the connection will unlock its true purpose." Jack read the words over her shoulder, his brow furrowing. "Margaret believed this altar was tied to Milo," he said. "It's like he's a conduit for something bigger. Something that only responds to your family." Laura nodded, her mind racing. "And the circle wants to control it," she said. "But why? What's so important about this connection?" Jack's gaze fell on Milo, who sat watching them with an almost human-like intensity. "Maybe the connection isn't just about Milo," he said slowly. "Maybe it's about what he's protecting. The symbols on the altar, they're not random. They're part of something ancient." As they examined the altar more closely, Jack traced the glowing symbols with his fingers. "These look like runes," he said, his voice tinged with awe. "I've seen something like this before, in articles about ancient civilizations. They believed certain animals were guardians of sacred knowledge." Laura frowned. "Sacred knowledge? Like what?" Jack hesitated, piecing together the fragments of what they had learned. "Knowledge that could change everything, power over life, nature, or even time. Whatever it is, the circle thinks your family holds the key to unlocking it through Milo." The realization sent a chill through Laura. "And they think if they take my daughter, they can control him." The gravity of their discovery was interrupted by a faint rustling in the woods. Jack's hand shot to his flashlight, and Milo immediately crouched, his body tense. "They're still out there," Jack said in a low voice. "We're not safe yet." Before they could act, a figure emerged from the shadows. But this time, it wasn't one of the hooded members of the circle. It was Charles Whitmore. "What are you doing here?" Laura demanded, her voice sharp. Charles raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. "I came to help," he said. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." Jack stepped forward, his expression hard. "You've done enough damage," he said. "Why should we trust you?" "Because I know what the circle is capable of," Charles said, his voice steady but urgent. "They're not just after power, they're after control. If they get what they want, they'll destroy everything." Laura crossed her arms, her anger simmering just beneath the surface. "You're the reason my grandmother had to run," she said. "Why should we believe you now?" Charles's face darkened with guilt. "Because I was wrong," he admitted. "I thought Margaret was dangerous, but she was right all along. She tried to warn us about the circle, but we didn't listen. Now they're stronger than ever, and they won't stop until they have what they want." Laura exchanged a glance with Jack, who gave her a slight nod. "What do you know about this place?" she asked, pointing to the altar. Charles hesitated, his gaze falling to the glowing runes. "It's a conduit," he said, "a link between the physical world and something beyond it. The circle believes it holds the key to unlocking limitless power, but only through the bond between the Guardian, Milo, and your family." Jack frowned. "And what happens if they succeed?" Charles's expression turned grim. "They'll use it to reshape the world in their image," he said. "They don't care about the cost. That's why Margaret fought so hard to keep this secret, and why you need to protect it now." Before they could respond, Milo stood abruptly, his fur bristling. A low growl rumbled in his throat, and his eyes locked onto the edge of the clearing. Jack spun around, his flashlight slicing through the darkness. More figures emerged from the trees, their hooded cloaks blending into the shadows. This time, they carried torches, the flames casting flickering light across their faces. One stepped forward, their voice cold and commanding. "You've meddled enough," they said, their gaze fixed on Laura. "The guardian belongs to us." Charles stepped in front of her, his stance protective. "You won't touch her," he said, his voice firm. "Not while I'm here," the leader of the circle sneered. "You can't stop us," they said. "This is bigger than you, bigger than her. The guardian will obey, or he will be destroyed." Milo hissed, leaping onto the altar. The runes flared brighter than ever, illuminating the clearing in an otherworldly glow. The circle recoiled, their confident facade cracking as the ground beneath the altar began to tremble. "Stay back," Jack shouted, pulling Laura behind him. "Milo's not going to let them win." The air crackled with energy, and a deep, resonant hum filled the clearing. Milo's gaze locked onto the leader of the circle, his eyes glowing with the same light as the runes. The energy surged, the light intensifying until it forced the circle to retreat. "You've underestimated him," Charles said, his voice steady. "And you've underestimated her family." When the light faded, the clearing was empty. The circle was gone, their torches extinguished, and the forest was silent once more. Milo leapt down from the altar, his body relaxing as he returned to Laura's side. "What just happened?" Laura whispered, her voice trembling. Jack placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Milo sent them a message," he said. "They know they can't control him or you." Charles nodded, his expression solemn. "But this isn't over. The circle will regroup. You need to be ready for what's next." The clearing fell silent, the faint glow of the altar's runes fading into the soft darkness of the forest. Milo sat at Laura's feet, his steady gaze radiating calm and reassurance. Jack exhaled deeply, his hands still gripping the flashlight as he scanned the woods for any remaining sign of the circle. "They're gone," Jack said finally, his voice low. "At least for now." Laura knelt beside Milo, her hands trembling as she stroked his fur. "You did it," she whispered. "You protected us, just like Margaret said you would." Milo purred softly, pressing his head against her hand. It wasn't just an act of affection. It felt like an acknowledgement, a silent vow that he would always be there for her family. Charles leaned against the altar, his face lined with exhaustion. "You've proven stronger than I gave you credit for," he said, his voice tinged with reluctant admiration. "But this fight isn't over. The circle won't stop until they've reclaimed what they believe is theirs." Laura stood, her resolve hardening. "They can try," she said, "but they'll never take Milo or my family. Margaret didn't run, and neither will I." Charles nodded, his gaze lingering on the glowing remnants of the runes. "The key to defeating them lies here," he said. "The altar, the bond between your family and Milo. It's more powerful than they understand. If you can harness it, you can stop them for good." Jack frowned, his protective instincts kicking in. "And how do we do that without putting Laura and her daughter in more danger?" Charles hesitated before answering. "You need to strengthen the bond," he said. "Margaret knew how to do it, and she left the clues in her journal. Study it, learn from it. The altar will respond when the time is right." Back at Laura's temporary home, the weight of the night's events pressed heavily on her. She sat at the kitchen table, Margaret's journal open before her, as Jack and Charles discussed strategies to keep her family safe. Milo lay curled beside her, his steady presence a source of comfort. Flipping through the journal, Laura found an entry that stopped her cold. Margaret had written about her final days in the house, her growing fear for her child, and her hope for the future. "If you're reading this, it means you've found Milo and the Guardian's rest. Trust him. He will guide you as he guided me. Together, you can protect what matters most." Laura's eyes filled with tears as she read the final lines. "Remember, love is stronger than fear, and a guardian's bond can never be broken." The days that followed were quiet but tense. Jack and Charles worked tirelessly to ensure that Laura and her children were safe, reinforcing the house and coordinating with local authorities to monitor any suspicious activity. Meanwhile, Laura delved deeper into Margaret's journal, learning about the rituals and practices her grandmother had used to strengthen her connection with Milo. As Laura spent more time with Milo, she began to notice subtle changes. His movements became more deliberate, his gaze more intense. It was as if he was preparing her for something, helping her understand the bond they shared. One evening, as Laura sat with Milo in the living room, her youngest daughter toddled over, clutching the locket they had found in the hidden compartment. "Kitty," the little girl said, holding the locket out to Milo. Milo sniffed the locket before nudging it gently with his nose. The runes on its surface began to glow faintly, and Laura felt a wave of warmth wash over her. It wasn't just a locket, it was a key, a tangible link to the bond Margaret had described. "That's it," Laura whispered, her voice trembling with realization. "It's not just about protecting us. It's about passing on what Margaret started." The years passed, and Laura's family grew stronger, their bond with Milo deepening with each passing day. The circle never returned, their influence weakened by the power of the altar and Milo's unwavering presence. Charles, who had once been an adversary, became an unexpected ally, dedicating his resources to uncovering and dismantling the circle's remaining networks. Milo remained by Laura's side, a constant reminder of the legacy Margaret had fought to protect. His watchful eyes seemed to hold the wisdom of centuries, a living connection to the past and a promise for the future. On a quiet spring morning, Laura sat on the porch with Milo at her feet, watching her children play in the yard. Her youngest, now a vibrant and curious 6-year-old, laughed as she chased a butterfly, her joy infectious. Milo watched her intently, his tail flicking in quiet approval. Laura smiled, her heart full. Margaret's words echoed in her mind. Love is stronger than fear, and a guardian's bond can never be broken. She reached down, stroking Milo's fur. "Thank you," she whispered, "for protecting us, for believing in us." Milo purred softly, his gaze steady. In that moment, Laura knew the truth. The bond they shared wasn't just about protection. It was about love, resilience, and the unbreakable connections that carried them forward, no matter what lay ahead.